right, let's talk stalemates. Let's talk stalemates. There's all kinds of stalemates in life. There's the big kinds that take up the headlines, the geopolitical type headlines, the ones from classical literature, etc. But there's also normal, everyday, mundane stalemates. So for our pleasure today, I put together a list of what I think are the top 4 most epic stalemates of modern history. You guys ready for this? All right, so let's take a look at number 4, the number 4 most epic stalemate of modern history. Right here. This is Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Now, if you're looking at that and thinking, I know what Alexander Hamilton looks like, and that's not him, then you need to ask your neighbor what this is all about. Okay, but not all stalemates capture the front of the New York Times. Some of them are found in classical literature. So for the number 3 most epic stalemate of modern history, check this one out. Yeah? Gollum and Samwise Gamgee. Any Lord of the Rings fans in the house? I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I love what Dumbledore did in that series. He did a great job. Big into Lord of the Rings. All right, number 3. Who recognizes this one? If you don't recognize this stalemate, this simply means you have a long life ahead of you. You're very young, and we're going to need you to take care of us while we're dying. Okay, now for number 1. If I could get a drum roll, please. And number 1, stalemate, here we go. Jim and Dwight from The Office. Talk about a relationship that was stuck. This relationship was stuck. Now, these stalemates are all somewhat epic in nature. They're big. We know about them from the media and literature and sports, et cetera, et cetera. But not all stalemates are quite like this. As a matter of fact, not all stalemates come from opposing sources. Many stalemates in life look a lot more like this right here. You might have seen this couple at Applebee's when you were on that hot date recently, and you look over and you see this couple and you're asking yourself, was there something that happened on the drive over? Has this been going on for some time? And you wonder these things. Stalemates have to do with a relationship being gridlocked and being stuck. When it comes to God's 2 agents of formation, the church and the home, we are in a stuck status. The church and the home are at a place of gridlock. Maybe not in every church, maybe not in every way, but we've been experiencing this for some time. So, for the sake of extreme clarity, let's get everybody on the same page. What is a stalemate? A stalemate is a situation in which neither side of 2 unique parties can make any sort of progress. In an arousing game of chess, if there is such a thing, a stalemate is a position of counting as a draw in which a player is not in check but cannot move except into check. Some of you know what that means. I don't even really know what that means, but I'm aware. So stalemates are relational in nature. They involve at least 2 parties. And they're characterized by the 2 relationships being stuck or gridlocked. And when it comes to the faith formation of our children, our 2 agents of formation, the church and the home, are in this stuck position. Maybe not all of us, but many of us are. So we find ourselves at this place. So just in recent weeks, our team has been talking a lot about the power of George Barna's book, Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions. Some of you probably remember. Anybody remember this book right here? By the way, I've got a copy right here, so for those of you sitting on the front row, you chose really well. So in George Barna's book, Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions, he popularized this phrase, parents are the primary spiritual influence over the lives of their kids. How many of you use that phrase on a somewhat regular basis? Yeah. This phrase, parents are the primary, has been the mantra of children's ministry. And I cannot express to you just the weight of this research that came across from George Barna in 2007. His work in this time period legitimized children's ministry in a way that few other works had ever accomplished. In a way, you could say this study by George Barna put children's ministry on the map, and it gave children and family ministry a seat at the leadership table because it could no longer be ignored that most humans come to Christ prior to the age of 14. All of this work was just hugely powerful. But this particular message of parents are the primary for children's ministry has become our foam finger. You guys know this? What is this in our society? We're at a sporting event and we're pointing this at our opponents and we're saying, we're number one. This is a foam finger. But this statement, parents are the primary, I'm concerned, and I think it's showing up in the data, that we have used this as a foam finger to message to parents, you're responsible. By the way, that's true. But let's take a look at what George Barna said in context, actually in that book. What he actually said was this: parents should provide the primary spiritual training of children. The parents may receive encouragement and training and resources through the church, but the parents are intended by God to be the primary provider of spiritual direction. But he didn't stop here. A few years later, you get one too. A few years later, he wrote this book, Revolutionary Parenting. And in Revolutionary Parenting, George Barna said this right here. Revolutionary parents, this group that he had identified in the research, revolutionary parents earnestly accept the role of being the primary dominant spiritual mentor of their children. Most of them acknowledge the importance of being active in a healthy community of faith, but they also define that community as being one of supplemental to what the parents are doing. My friends, my brothers and sisters, fellow members of the children's ministry and family ministry community, we have to remember that this group of revolutionary parents were the high flyers, the great achievers, the straight-A students. These are the ones who were the most engaged. So as we extrapolate out of this research, this idea that parents are the primary, we do need to put it in context that these parents already were moving in that direction. Just this past year, Mike Handler and I traveled to London, and we were interviewing a researcher of child faith formation, and she said that their research has shown the number one reason that parents don't engage in child faith formation is they lack confidence. And they lack confidence because they also lack experience. And the more they dig, they lack experience because they've simply not been trained. So here's my thesis for the morning. We have to move beyond the declaration, parents are the primary. We need to carry this statement, this mantra with us into the future. It's true. It's accurate. It's theologically straight from the pages of Scripture. But we as God's shepherds and equippers and pastors and church leaders, we have a job to do as well. This statement is accurate, but it's also incomplete. So here's what our time together this morning is going to look like. By the way, has anyone gone to a movie since kind of post-COVID? Raise your hand if you have. I have found myself in the movie theater reaching for the clicker because I want to know where we're at on the progress bar in the movie. Like, I'm so spoiled by this home streaming, I really want to know where we're at. So it helps me to know, okay, where are we at in our journey? So this morning, we're going to define the stalemate, we're going to evaluate the gap in our orthopraxy, and we're going to lead beyond the stalemate. These are the three areas we're going to talk about. Now, granted, I want to be really clear. This is a bit of a data-heavy presentation. So if you like data, stats, and research, this is going to be a geek fest, and you're going to love it. If you tend to gloss over, I've done my best to tell some stories and make the research really come to life. So you ready to go? All right, here we go. Let's define the stalemate. As Melanie mentioned, we've been doing research for the past 11 years, going into 11 years, and throughout that research, we've asked the question, What is it the church does that leads to lasting faith with kids? That's the singular, if there's a center of the target, that's the question we've been asking. What is it the church does that leads to lasting faith in kids? That's why we're all here. This is why we do what we do. And in the process of asking this question, we kept bumping up against this idea of the stalemate, the gridlock or stuck nature of these two agents of formation, the church and the home. So in our 2022 study with the Barna Group, which, by the way, if you don't have one of these, you can also pick one of these up right here. You also chose a very good seat. Here's our Barna research. Good catch. Hope you can get a paper cut. In this study in 2022, we asked this question to 600 children's ministry leaders and 2,000 parents and congregants. We asked them, where should the primary source of child's discipleship take place? Where should the primary source of child discipleship take place? Church or home? But before we go straight into the data, because some of you are not excited about the Geek Fest, I'm going to tell two stories. Let's first talk about this story right here. This is a group of 10 children's ministry leaders on the East Coast. It's been a long day. It's 10 p.m. They've attended a children's ministry conference, and they're sitting in the lobby, and someone asked that same question. Who do you think's primarily responsible for children's discipleship? Is it the church or the home? How do you think this conversation would go? Next story. At that very same moment, at 7 p.m. on the West Coast, there's a dinner party of 10 parents. They're having this same conversation. Someone says, when the pastor, taught this weekend and he introduced this idea of parents, leading our children spiritually, what do you guys think about that? Do you think we are responsible, or do you think the church is responsible? So let's take a look and see how this data shakes out. Where should the primary source of children's discipleship take place? 3 different groups are being measured: children's ministry leaders, what we would call congregants, and then parents. So you can see the children's ministry leaders here. 95% say children's discipleship should take place at home, 5% at church. What do we call this? It's this right here. It is a declaration. Parents are the primary. There's not really any discussion. It is a declaration. Parents are the primary. If this is a text, I'm guessing it has a lot of exclamation points. Am I clear? Yeah. Okay. However, among parents and congregants, you can almost imagine how that conversation would have gone around that dinner table. Some are saying, well, I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I take my kids to church. I need the church to help me and to do something. Then another mom or a father speaks up and says, well, yeah, but we do have them most of the week. We have time with them. We have accessibility. We are primarily responsible. So this is a big part of understanding the stalemate. Church leaders and parents simply do not agree on the domain of faith formation. They don't agree. And this pain point in our community is something that we feel, and we've felt it for some time. Let's go into a couple more items in understanding where we are in this. We also did another research project that same year, and we discovered that the churches, this isn't my opinion, this is what the data shows, and I'll get into it, the church's leading strategy to train and equip parents is to give them a resource, whether that's a physical resource or whether that's a digital resource, etc. So let's look at this question we asked with the 5x5 research agency. We asked specifically, what are you doing to equip parents to help them disciple kids? Notice we didn't, we tried to keep that open, right? The top response here, providing them with resources or materials. Look at this gap between the first and the second and all the rest. It's almost a 30% gap. It's clearly the leading strategy of children's ministry to equip parents is to hand them a resource. And if we were to use our own trade or our craft of children's ministry as a metaphor, I think we could say this: the take-home paper has found its way to the floor of the minivan. What we know to be true, finish this sentence, what we know to be true is the parents are not doing it. They're not using the resources. We're equipping them. We're giving them the resources, but they're not using them. So let's kind of define this first section. Let's define it by talking about the church's responsibility and the parents' responsibility. So the church's responsibility, it's the role of the church, according to Scripture, to train and equip the saints for the work of discipleship. Church leaders are the most trained, the most experienced, and skilled at discipling children, yet they have the least amount of weekly access to engage them relationally. Now let's talk about the home's responsibility. Parents are the primary disciplers of their kids at home. Parents have the most weekly access to children, yet they lack the confidence and experience. Thus, many do not engage in discipling their children. And let me ask you, do you feel this? That anxiety that you carry in your stomach and that weight you carry and heap over your shoulders is the stalemate. It shows up in the way your body carries this stress. It shows up in some of your sleepless nights. It shows up in isolation you may feel during staff meetings and your resignation-fraught Mondays. It's clear from the scriptures, it's clear from the data that we are facing this stalemate. So we should ask ourselves, what should we do differently? The shepherds, the leader, there's leaders in this room. If you're a highly motivated parent, you're a leader. If you're a volunteer, if you're a director, pastor, you're responsible on some level for shepherding through this stalemate. So let's move into section 2 of evaluating our orthopraxy. Let's evaluate our orthopraxy. So during this season of COVID, where all of us were tucked away in our houses, you've heard about these studies about the new habits we picked up and the new things we developed. Well, one thing that was new to us, and it's on us, it's no one's fault, it's ours, but we found these guys on YouTube. Is anyone familiar? If you're a parent or a manager and you don't know about these guys, shame on you. This is amazing. These are body language behavioral experts, and they walk through these clips online and they evaluate like Meghan and Harry and all these celebrity clips, and they're looking for their facial expressions and gestures to figure out, are they being truthful or are they being deceptive? So these guys are experts. They work with like the CIA, the FBI, the military. Honestly, many of them are interrogators. They've worked with criminals. But I think this is important because what they talk about every single episode on YouTube is called baseline behavior. Baseline behavior. They're trying to understand, if you were with them, I know Kurt right here, if Kurt was with them, they would try to evaluate what's Kurt's baseline behavior. Who is Kurt when he's relaxed and he's just being him? But then who is Kurt when he's stressed? And how can we tell and really evaluate, is this guy being honest? Is he being truthful? That's what they do. And what does this have to do with children's ministry and child discipleship? In our 2022 research, we did a project called How Do Children's Ministry Leaders Spend Their Time? Because we wanted to know, if parents are the primary, does our orthopraxy match our theology? How are we spending our time? So we needed to establish our behavioral baseline as a community. So let the Geek Fest begin. Question right here. As a children's ministry leader in your church, how do you spend your time each week? Please list up to the top items that fill up the majority of your week, up to 5 items. The top item here, preparation and planning, is at 144%. Catherine mentioned this last year. How can that be? That's because preparation and planning was mentioned 1.44 times per person. But there's more. Preparation and planning, communication, administrative tasks, meetings, coordinating schedules. The vast majority of how we spend our time, our baseline behavior, is administrative tasks. It's what consumes our world. This is what you told us in the research. A few more data points here. The next one, of the activities listed below, the first question was open-ended. This one they had check boxes. Of the activities listed below, which ones would you say take up the majority of your time and capacity throughout a typical week? Communication, event prep, weekend prep, volunteer management, customizing curriculum, weekend prep. The top items most of them are administrative in nature. And on this same, we're gonna zoom out on this. Right down here at the bottom is mentoring and discipling parents. We could have lied and put this as number one, but we were honest, right? Like, it just fell to the bottom. All right, next one. Regardless of how you spend the majority of your time, what do you believe that you are doing that you believe will have the most impact on child discipleship? Building relationships, prayer, discipleship, mentoring, equipping parents, communicating and visiting, and there's some more relational things down here. But the top items are relational in nature. So we've got this tension we're living in. Our baseline behavior is administrative tasks. And by the way, no one's arguing against administrative tasks. You can look at parts of the New Testament and Acts, I think it's Acts chapter 6, where they're talking about the distribution and taking care of people administratively. These are important things. No one's arguing against administrative tasks. That is not the point. Next question here, we got 2 more to go. What do you wish you could do that you are not currently doing in any of these areas in the survey to be more effective at discipling children? Mentoring parents and equipping volunteers, it's not even close. This is where our heart is. Last data point right here. Then we drilled into, now that we've established baseline behavior, how frequently are you focusing specifically on equipping parents to help them disciple their children in any way? I'm only going to talk about the far right and the far left. The far right, this is 1 out of 5, seldom or never. I'm guessing this group perhaps lacks the vision or they're just kind of given up. Now let's go to the straight A students. This is weekly equipping. Whereas these are the stars in the room, the stars among us. 1 out of 3 of us is doing weekly equipping, but 55% of this straight A student group, when we say weekly, what we mean is 1 to 3 hours. So out of our 25 to 50, 60 hour week, whatever it is in your context, we're spending about 1 to 3 hours relationally doing some kind of mentoring, equipping parents. Talk to me for a minute. What's the message? What's the message? What do you hear? What do you see? Tasks over people. Yeah. And no one is against tasks. So we have to do the tasks. Yeah. So let's do this summary again. The church reality and the home reality. The church reality is kids pastors, those in children's ministry, spend the majority of their time doing administrative work and very little time doing relational mentoring, training, and equipping, which they believe will have the biggest impact on discipling the children in their community. The home reality, only a small percentage of parents actually engage in discipling their children at home. A higher percentage of parents simply lack the confidence to disciple their kids, and they claim they've never been trained on how to do it. If for some reason you're feeling like you haven't accomplished anything today, I just want to say congratulations, you've made it this far. So we're getting somewhere. Okay, can I tell you that I'm hopeful? I am hopeful. I'm hopeful because of what John just taught. This is a lead pastor and an author of an influential church who's sharing this message that the most important work of the church is reaching those that are children and students and shaping the future. There's a posture of the church beginning to realize we've got to move from attractional ministry to formational ministry. Nothing wrong with attractional, but formation is where it's at, and it's what we see Jesus doing in the Gospels. So let's talk about what does moving beyond the stalemate look like. But as we move into this third part, I want to tell a personal story. I want to tell a painful story, and quite frankly, it's a story that doesn't paint the younger version of me in the best light. In 2012, I had been working for 8 years prior to that with an organization called D6 in Randall House. They're running the resource center out here. They're good friends of mine, good friends of our ministry. And I'd helped get D6 up off the ground, and it was a beautiful season. But God was making it very clear that that season was coming to an end. And as that season was coming to an end, God brought Awana, this ministry that I'm a part of now, into our lives personally and professionally. And this was kind of our life around 2012. Katie and I had custom built a home on the Cumberland River here in Nashville, the river across the street, and then the woods behind us. Our kids grew up in Mayberry. It was Mayberry. And yet we feel like we sense God saying, move to Chicago. Move to Chicago. So this beautiful life, this community that my wife had been a part of for over 20 years at this point, and I've been a part of for about 10 or 15, God was saying, we want you to go somewhere else. And we actually saw God move in ways that we both prayed for. But once God said yes, I took off. And if we're using, I'm mixing all sorts of metaphors, but if we're using football as a metaphor, I'm at the 3-yard line trying to punch the ball into the end zone, and I'm turning around. Katie's back at the other 20-yard line. I'm going, babe, what are you doing? Get up here where I am. This is going to be awesome. And this kept going for 1 year, for 2 years, and into 3 years. This conversation of joy and pain. I could not comprehend this. It takes husbands sometimes a long time. But this idea that joy and pain could coexist. I remember one day being on a walk with her, and I'm like, Katie, I feel like you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. She's like, yeah, it's because joy and pain can exist side by side. There is joy. There's joy in this. But the reality is I'm still grieving of what we walked away from. That's very honest. That's very real. Well, as we're entering into the 3rd year of this, I said to her one day in my frustration, Katie, I feel like all you want me to do is sit in a ditch and cry with you. And she said, now you're getting somewhere. That's exactly what I want you to do. In that season, I set everything down. And I sat with her. And honestly, for the first time, I truly listened. And I think this is a bit of what's happening in this dynamic of declaration, parents are the primary, compared to dialogue, that group of 10 parents sitting around. I mean, if you could join one of those 2 meetings, 10 kids pastors, quite frankly, we know what y'all are going to say. We know what you're going to say. But isn't there a level of curiosity? What could we hear in the pain of the parents and the grandparents sitting around that table? As shepherds of the gospel, the sheep will not lead us out of this stalemate. The shepherd is to humbly come alongside the sheep, pick the sheep up if it's injured, put it along the shoulders. It's not efficient, but it's the work of the gospel, and it's what we see Jesus doing. So we're going to introduce to you something that's new, as in right in this second. But in a year from now, this is going to be published with our partner, Moody Publishers, coming out next year in a book called Forming Faith. So if you're a note taker, check that out 12 months from now. But this is a church leaders forming faith pathway to get us beyond the stalemate, because we think it's possible. We think it's possible by what we see in the scripture and what we see in the research from all that we're learning. So there's 3 columns here. There's a spine right down the middle, and there's a left arm, I guess you could say, and a right arm. What I want to make clear is that this isn't the church on one side and the home on the other side. This is you as the shepherd in your responsibility for the church and your responsibility for the home. See the difference between parents are the primary with the foam finger is saying you parents are responsible. This is saying, we're going to get into, but what am I as a shepherd responsible for to help shape the home, to help influence the home? So there's 2 key questions that this chart is asking. The 4 center objectives are vision, time and place, language, and community. The 4 key objectives that I think we are responsible for to help move beyond the stalemate are vision, time and place, language, and community. And there's 2 questions we need to be asking. We need to be asking 2 questions. How can we, as church leaders, build a local church model that trains and equips parents to disciple their kids? Probably not the first time you've asked that question, but hopefully this could be a little more insightful. But instead of just saying, okay, this is us, now you parents go do it all, we also need to ask, how can we as shepherds and ministers, how can we train, as leaders, train and mobilize parents to build a culture of discipleship in the home. Let's illustrate why this is important. So let's pretend I got one person to give me feedback a minute ago. You are a straight A student. You're one of the 1/3%. But I need more people to chime in. If we could get parents to do certain types of behaviors to engage with their kids, to disciple them at home, what would those be? Just shout them out. I'm going to write these down. Read the Bible. I have horrible handwriting, by the way, but pray. Okay. What is this? Sabbath. Okay, what else? Memorization. Model. What did I hear? Prioritize what? Okay, so like faith over sports, okay? I heard serve. Okay, a couple more. Worship and presence. Okay, we'll stop there. We're gonna hold on to these. We're gonna come back to these, okay? And I would like to explain why just telling them to do these things within and of itself is not sufficient. So let's kind of punch in. We're gonna punch into this side right here, so you can see we're gonna populate this with some information. But you might be thinking, boy, I wish you could zoom in a little farther. Watch this. Bam, we did it. Okay, so let's talk about the formational church. I'm going to spend less time describing this, and I'm going to spend more time describing the other side. Quite frankly, some other people this afternoon are going to talk about some of these items as well. On the vision level, what church leaders need to be doing, and by the way, it may be that your lead pastor, your lead teachers are the best people to do this. Well, then your job becomes, how do I influence them to do that, right? So we have to cast vision in our church community for child discipleship. We have to cast vision that children are seen, they're known, they're recognized. This is what a thriving church community does. It's how the church multiplies itself and reaches more people. And it's the base, most strategic, futuristic thing we can do. So what can you do to keep giving your pastor a one sheet that gives your pastor key little one-line phrases, not for Kids Sunday, which we all beg for and never happens, but to weave into the weekly teaching and sermons? Imagine if you could help your pastor cast that kind of vision. The other one is right here, in time and place. We spend all this time getting parents to show up to church. You know, there's all kinds of research that shows different things from 1 to 4 times a month. You know, they come on a weekend, typically is the primary time that most people are coming to a church. I'm arguing that we can get them while we've got them. Train parents while they're there. How many of you have a new believers class or a baptism class? Raise of hands. Yeah, how many of you have a next steps class? Some of you do confirmation. There's all these things we do to help parents or to help adults to take a next step of faith. We're working so hard to get them there. Now, what a pastor probably will not go for is, hey, we're going to take 75 people out of the Sunday morning service. They're probably not going to go for that. But if your pastor is already warm to a next steps class, which is part of your morning rotation, we've got to figure out how to train parents while they've already come to our church facility. And when we get into the other half, we'll talk about what are we training them on, and we would love to be able to help you with a plan on how to do that. Number 3, change the language, and you can change the culture. We started saying a few years ago, we've got to shift our thinking from children's ministry, Melanie said earlier, to child discipleship. That's an example. If we can change the language, we can change the culture. What language can we add into our church culture? Whoever's giving the announcements. Guys, you become best friends with the worship pastor and the people giving the announcements. Help shape the vernacular of your church to be a church where children and students are at the center, because it's the most strategic thing the church can do is to shape the faith of this generation. And number 4, cultivate an intergenerational community. There's been so much done on this the last 20 years. I'm not going to talk about this very much. There's probably books at Randall House's table that talk about this significantly. Carapow's done great work. Lots of people have done some really good work over here. So let's go to this. Oh, by the way, I do want to back up and remember what's being discussed here is answering this question. how can church leaders build a church model? This is about how can we leverage what's happening at church for the discipleship of these children in the next generation. So let's move into the right half, which is answering the question, how can church leaders train and mobilize parents to build a culture of discipleship in the home? Let's talk about these four things: vision, time and place, language, and community. All right, vision. Cultivate in the heart of parents a vision for their child's future. I want you guys to take a look at this sketch I did backstage a little bit ago. I'm just kidding, I didn't do this. All right, if I'm in your shoes, and I have the opportunity to sit down with either a parent over coffee or a group of 10 parents or a workshop of 25 or 100 parents, one of the most foundational things I'm gonna do is I wanna tap into their heart for their child. I want to tap into their heart. I want to understand, talk to me about how you think and feel about your child. Your child is, let's say, 8 now, or 2 or 4, or whatever point they are in their, who do you want them to be when they're 25, 35, 55? Get them to share that vision. It's one of the most important steps we can begin to do as a parent. And help them capture that. Write it down, put it in a journal. Let's create some resources for them to talk about and to record their vision for their child's future. I imagine you're gonna have different types of parents. You might have some parents that talk about, they want them to have a faith in Christ and be a member of the church of the future, in your church community in the future, so on and so forth. You might have some parents, however, that talk about education and talk about their career and stability. And then you mention faith, and that too. But that's an opportunity for you to cultivate that in the heart of the parent. Let's move on to the next one. Time and place. The second thing I would do is I would work with parents on I would create a resource, or I want to create it a year from now, but I would create a resource that has a packed, the normal calendar. What does their life actually look like? Tell me what your world looks like. What does your week look like? You have 3 kids, 4 kids, 2 kids. Let's talk about that. Let's give them the opportunity to flip the calendar over and to dream. If we're a married couple, should we be talking about the frantic pace of the American family? If our vision for our child or our children is what we just declared, is this pattern going to get us there? They say the most formational things in life are typically not epic big moments. It's like water over a rock. It's the mundane. And it's in the mundane in life that formation is taking place. Get them to fill that calendar out, flip it over, and to just start asking questions and to think differently. This is about how can the family use time and place differently. Next, language. When my oldest son, Warren, who's back here somewhere, when he was coming home from the hospital, first day, I'm looking out the window, and my wife she's got his pudgy little hand, and it's like going over a leaf, and I walk up behind her, and I'm like real curious what's going on. They're having a special moment out here, and she's talking to him, and she's saying, Warren, this is a leaf, and God made this tree, and do you see these little veins, and God made those, and God made you, and I'm like, hey, babe, he can't understand you. And Katie, in her godly wisdom, said, the days are going to turn to weeks, weeks are going to turn to months, and months are going to turn to years. But if I talk to him now as if he understands me, the dialogue between us and our kids is just going to free flow. Talk and listen to our kids from infancy and train parents to do that. Parents say, you went to seminary, I didn't go to seminary, I'm just so insecure. Okay, well then what can you talk about? I'm seeing my good friend Craig right here. Craig's from Australia. He likes to talk about Australia. He likes to talk about coffee. Talk to your kids about what you can talk about and by the way, Craig is a good disciple with his kids. He can talk about his faith, but have them at least begin by talking about the things that their kids are interested in and that they can talk about. And through talk, guess what you're doing? You're building the infrastructure for discipleship to take place. If there was not electrical conduit running through this, there would be no infrastructure for the electricity to get to point A to point B. Talk and listening is the basic infrastructure for discipleship. And part 4, build the team. Build the team. If this is your child, get them to kind of build a circle or an oval, put your child in the middle. Who are the 5 people that you're going to surround your child with? Like, what's their team? If you have 3 kids, you need a team for each one of your kids. It's a life group leader or a Sunday school teacher. It's a coach. You got an aunt and uncle and a real close mentor of yours when you're asking your mentor, hey, could you also mentor Sarah? Build a team. Here's what I want us to see. By answering this question and training the parents to have a culture of discipleship, we're trying to pour these things like a salt and pepper shaker into a culture that's not ready to receive them. The home is not built for a culture or an infrastructure for discipleship. It's just not. So before I move into, or as I move into these things, I'm going to also help the family build a culture, a system, and an infrastructure so these things can take place. Otherwise, we're asking them to do these things in the midst of that very frantic calendar. So what we've built here is a pathway to help form and shape the faith of the home, to help begin to see the needle move and to move beyond the stalemate. So in order to do this, we have to decide what we're going to do. Are we going to make any changes? Let's go back to these straight A students. Our weekly, those who invest 1 to 3 hours a week, if we were just working with this group, I think we'd be asking, well, how could we change that to 2 to 6 hours a week? How could I go from 3 hours of relational equipping with parents a week to 6 hours? What would that do, like compound interest, week over week, over week, over month, over year? What would be the long-term impact of that? Now, most of us hear this and we're like, oh, I'm overwhelmed with administrative tasks. I got to move. I got to figure out how to create more time for relational equipping because that's the heart of ministry. We've got to figure out how to do this in our church culture and our church leadership. Most of us want to do this, but we got to figure out how to do this. Some of you have probably read this book by James Clear on atomic habits, where he talks about the habits, the processes we use, the outcomes we're looking for, and the identity. Let's pick on the big bully of smoking cigarettes, right? Everyone wants to stop smoking cigarettes. Like, what's the process? We're going to stop smoking cigarettes. That outcome would be, I am now someone who no longer smokes cigarettes. And the reason so many people fail to stop smoking cigarettes is their identity, because they don't see themselves as a healthy person. And I think what we struggle with as a community is we see our identity as this. These are methodologies, not identity. My friends, my brothers, and my sisters, your identity, you are the chief executive of child discipleship in your community. That's your identity. You are the chief executive of child discipleship in your community. Whether it's your home, whether you're on your team, and you're not even the boss, but embody a spirit of I am chiefly responsible for discipling these children. And on your calendar, you've got to look at that calendar on Monday, and you work weeks ahead if you have to. Get ahead of your calendar if you need to. And we've got to figure out how to start spending more time doing the relational work we see Jesus doing in the Gospels. Administrative work is incredibly important, and no one's arguing that we drop balls. But if we don't get ahead of this and have the strategic conversation, I think we can expect to remain stuck. So here's the prevailing thought of the day. It is true that parents are the primary disciplers of their kids. It is true. No one's arguing any differently. Dialogue. It's also true that by not dynamically engaging parents and training and equipping them to disciple their own children, the church is falling short on its mission of child discipleship. We have been talking about moving from children's ministry to child discipleship, moving from attractional church growth to formational. This right here is the work ahead of us. And the church of 2050 will thank you. God bless.
When I was a children's pastor,